Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, it's Zoe, your friendly neighborhood Australian-Canadian leadership expert. And my question for you today is, do you want your teams singing from the same hymn sheet? What does that mean? It means, do you want everybody to communicating the same message about who you are as a company, what you stand for, what's important to you, and what you do in the world? Well, of course you do, especially when you have teams that are autonomous. And it's so important that that consistency is embedded. And it's the single most important way that you can be clear to your customers, to the community, and to everybody else who's looking at you, what you are all about. So how do we go about doing that? My guest today tells us how. He is a verbal identity expert, which I just love as a job description. He's a communications expert, and he specializes in the power of language to communicate brand in particular. And we have a fantastic conversation. His name is Chris West. He is the founder of verbalidentity.com. And he has worked with some amazing big picture brands, including Alphabet, Google's parent company. And prior to that, though, he didn't end up in communications. He didn't start studying that. He studied human physiology. And we talk about in the interview about how he made the big leap. Maybe it sounds like a big leap. I think it is a big leap from human physiology into the study of language and the power of language. Now, I love this interview because, one, it talked about language, and as a writer and as a communicator, I know the power of words. I believe that words are weapons, and we can wield them for both good and evil. And when we are conscious and deliberate about our choice of words, we can be incredibly uplifting, inspiring, motivating, or if we don't use them consciously, we can be derogatory, abusive, and so many other horrible things. So as leaders, we want to be conscious and intentional about our use of language. Now, Chris, in our interview, talks about a format and a formula for how we go about crafting our messages as leaders that can be picked up and translated easily across an entire organization. We talk about Elon Musk, amongst other things, and the power of CEOs and how their words have instant effect in the communities around them. Lots to unpack here. Settle in. This is a fun one. I had a ball on this interview. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. So without further ado, on with the show. Chris West, all the way from Oxford, England. It's very posh. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I don't know why you think I'm posh. Let me assure you, I'm really not.
Well, I think if you come from Oxford, everybody has all the affiliations and associations to that particular word with it. So I think you can ride that wave, I think.
Just for now.
And you might have, just for now, okay. We don't want to set the audience up with false expectations, right?
That's right.
Now, you talk about yourself as a verbal identity expert, which is something I've never heard of. And I thought, that's clever, that's interesting. How does someone end up as a verbal identity expert? What's been your road to get to this point?
I think you have to take a lot of wrong turns to get here. And because it's really, I always say our business is a niche within a niche. It's such a small corner of the world that you couldn't really ever plan it as a career path. I mean, you could say, look, I want to be in communications or I want to be in advertising. And the chances are you would be where I was 25 years ago as a creative copywriter in an ad agency. Or maybe you'd be buying, the other big part of comms is media strategy. And, there's a small section which is brand identity. Who are we? What do we stand for? How do we realize that in all of our assets, in the way we talk, the way we look? But only the smallest part of that really is how do we use language to create an identity for us as a business? So that's why I say, it's a niche within a niche. And to get there, you might say, well, Chris, you were a copywriter in advertising, but before that, I was all of my education was in science. So I was a real kind of taught to be a rational thinker. Science was it. And I did a university, did an undergraduate degree in human physiology, no relationship to what I did later on. I did a postgrad in computer science, no relationship at all. But, in some ways, that really helped me because, well, first of all, it helped me because I hated the industry I was in. So I hated working in the industry so much when I left and was working in the computer business that I thought, I have to go 180 degrees in the other direction. I just have to leave all of this way behind. So I was looking roughly in the right space. But when I got into the right space, the fact that I wasn't, let's say, a fluffy kind of off-the-wall creative type, but I was this rationalist thinker that said, hey, well, if this is true, then surely we can look at that. That really helped me. And it helped me stand out, at least, which I think is often, one of the main things you need when you're creating language and creating positioning. So I did that for 20 years. And about 10 years ago, each time I left a meeting, Zoe, client would kind of grab me by the sleeve quietly and say, hey, Chris, we've got 10,000 words to write before breakfast tomorrow. Can you help us? And I was like, I see what's going on. Now you've got, 10 different social media channels. CRM has arrived in the world. Investor relations maybe union relations has arrived in the world. Maybe what your teams say when they pick up the phone or on the shop floor, customer service is important. Suddenly, anyone that's leading a business has 30, 40 different channels that they're communicating in each day. And what they really need is someone not to write the stuff for them, but someone to help them say, what's the identity that we want as a business, inside the business and outside? Who are we to our team, to our employees? Who are we to the outside world? And how can we create that in language? Because language is working everywhere all the time. When someone picks up the phone, when the CEO speaks, when the GM speaks, as well as all the external and internal comms. So I realized that although it was a small niche, it was critical for businesses. So, a few wrong turns, and that's where you end up.
I love it. I'm just puzzling and wondering about this connection of starting your study in the human body and physiology and abandoning that and discovering language. What was it about language that was attractive to you?
It's fun. I hadn't thought about this until you asked this question, but I remember when I was 7 or 8, I asked my mum, please, can I have a subscription to this magazine? What is it? And it was called How It Works. And it was all about how aeroplanes work or about how a cake mixer works or what. So I've always been really interested in how things work. And I think that human physiology, how the body works, was really interesting. But the language thing, like, how is it possible, Zoe, that you framed that question in your head? Over time, the time it takes your question to get from you to me, literally halfway around the world, language wraps up that question. It delivers it like a cargo plane. It delivers it, lands it in my head, unpacks the thought out of the back of the cargo plane, and it's intact and I can understand what you said. For me, that's amazing. Do you know what I mean? That language can work like that. How does it work like that? There's a great book, and I've not read it because I read the title and I thought, yeah, that's it. It's called The Language Animal. And it basically proposes that one of the reasons we're so successful as a species is that we have language, because language has allowed us to share ideas and build relationships. And so why did I end up being so interested in language for business? Because really, what else is a business? But it's a series of shared ideas and shared relationships. And language is clearly going to be a really wonderful, beautiful way of doing that. So that's kind of how I ended up in this odd space.
Wow, that is so cool. And I'm a language geek myself in that I'm a writer.
Yeah.
So I've written a couple of books and I love language. I love writing. I love what language can evoke in other people. And that's exactly what you're talking about. How do the words, the sounds that we deliver evoke images, emotion, concepts? with the people around us. So it is an incredibly powerful tool that humans have developed for sure. And I think, other animals have communication strategies and they have a language of sorts. It doesn't feel as sophisticated as what humans can do.
No, absolutely not.
And this has major implications for business. And this is where, coming back to where you are in terms of your niche and your observations. And one of the things that you've observed is CEOs' words and how they can affect the business. Tell us about that.
Oh, so, a lot of people, if I tell them, look, I work for this business called Verbal Identity, half the time they'll go, what, gerbil identity? No, gerbils don't need identity, verbal identity. Right? Okay, so you work verbal identity. Well, that sounds odd, Chris. I help businesses use language better. Oh, okay, so you help them with their external comms. Sure, we do, because that's an obvious, but actually, the language that a business uses inside the building about itself creates an understanding for everyone in the building of what the business is and what it stands for. And so obviously that comes from the peers around you, but it's a very dramatic effect from what the CEO says. So CEOs are often, not always, but they're often enigmatic, charismatic people, and they have this way with language. Because what else have they got when they're starting up or when they're getting into a leadership position, except language to persuade people? And so, I've worked with some people who are just beautiful communicators. I suppose when we look around the world, we can see 2 or 3 amazing CEOs who have used language really well. And coming to my mind are Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, and the late Steve Jobs. Something they all have in common is, well, the huge personal fortunes they made from the companies they built. The less obvious thing is how skillfully they used language. And I don't know if you saw recently that Elon Musk wiped apparently $140 billion off Tesla's value. Did you see that?
Well, yeah, because he put out a tweet on Twitter saying, hey, should I sell off some of my stock? And Twitter went, yeah, do it. And so he said, okay.
With 8 words or something. Now, you could say, well, that's not really his language, that's his position, but he's such a he's a particularly skilled user of language that I think he's very conscious of language and what it does. So I remember early days of Tesla, when no one had really had the idea that electric cars could be a real thing. As far as everyone was concerned, cars were these things that basically went fast. That was the point of a car. It went fast because it got you somewhere quicker than if you walked. But the only electric vehicles that anyone had seen at that point were there were 2 kinds. There were milk floats that the milkman used to deliver milk in the morning, and there were golf carts. And both of those had a top speed of, a little more than walking. So Elon was going to introduce a car. He had to get people to believe that it was a fast car. Any other CEO would have said, you know what, we'll put wings on the car. We'll make the engine sound really noisy or whatever. We'll spend all this money. But what Elon was so smart about was he said, actually, we can use language to do this. And so the 2 speed options on the car are not just called fast and super fast. They're called ludicrous and insane.
Really? That actually says that in the car?
Yeah. So you don't put it into super fast or super fast. You put it into ludicrous or insane. So just with language, just by choice of word, he's managed to get everyone to realize these are fast cars. And of course, Steve Jobs, this is why I love language so much, and that's why, the subtitle of my book was about the fastest, smartest, cheapest marketing tool you're not using. I should have said business tool you're not using, but you think about what Steve Jobs did. Now, if you have an iPhone that breaks, or you don't know how it's working or something's going wrong, you're quite happy to make an appointment in advance and then wait in a queue, go halfway across town, wait in a queue to be served by an earnest young person, but they're probably only working there 12 hours a week to make some extra pocket money. But you're willing to do that. Why? Not because it's called a customer service station or not because it's called repairs, but because Steve Jobs said, let's call it the Genius Bar. And let's have the people working there, not customer service reps or what, let's call them Apple geniuses. So now people like me walk up and they go, oh, I'm about to get my phone looked at by an Apple genius. How could it be better? Just by calling them geniuses at the Genius Bar, it's completely reframed in my mind what the experience will be, what the value of the service is. So we put names, we put language as labels on everything, and the choice of label we put on it immediately frames what it is for other people.
So around that, I mean, I don't know if you know or not, and you can answer to guess. So whether it's the Elon Musk's choice of labeling it ludicrous, and what was the other one?
Ludicrous and insane.
Ludicrous and insane. Or Steve Jobs choosing to name the service counter the Genius Bar. Do you think it was intentionally to disrupt or challenge conventions? Is that one of the aspects of what makes it so powerful?
I would love to have sat next to Steve Jobs at dinner. I would never have liked to have worked with him. I think he would have been an incredibly opinionated, kind of disruptive thinker, would have challenged every assumption that I had. And that would have been an extremely stimulating 2 hours at dinner. I would hate to have gone in to work for him in the morning. I mean, it may have been wonderful. But yeah, he's disruptive. And whether they're conscious or not, I think they probably are. I think they probably go, I know what I can do with language, or I know what I have to do. And I know that language is the cheapest, smartest, fastest way I can get it to happen.
I think it's really fascinating to have a look at this. And I think about some of Elon's communications, right? So one of the early things he did, and I'm curious about your point of view, is this: when he started designing the big rockets that could be reusable, and he called it the BFR, the big F-bomb rocket. He's since dropped that terminology, and it is now something different. What do you think about, like, that's a deliberate choice to call it the BFR and then to change it to something different? What's that about?
I don't ever imagine walking into a meeting and seeing Elon Musk wearing a 1990s style pinstripe suit with a white shirt and a tie and being very traditional CEO leadership. What he's doing is bringing a particular character to the business. And he's got investors, and he's not saying, oh, well, I'll play it nicey. He's continually restating and reframing what SpaceX and what Tesla are as a business. And he needs to do that every single day to challenge the world's perception. So the world doesn't keep on putting, say, Tesla into the, oh, just another car business. He's using them to continually say, no, we're not in that set. And we're not in that set because I don't look like every other CEO and I don't speak like every other CEO. So the chances are my car is not going to look or sound like every other car. My space rocket is not going to look and sound like every other space rocket, So I think what we have to do as business owners is continually differentiate ourselves for the right reasons from other businesses. But the first job is to draw attention to us. There's 115 million companies in the world. Most of them we've never heard of. Most of those we have heard of, we don't remember for a second, right? So the first job is really get people's attention and then differentiate yourself for the right reason. So that's why I think it is, because there's Zoe, there's Chris, there's all your listeners. And what are we doing? We're talking about Elon Musk with a slight sense of awe, with a slight sense of wonder, maybe even confusion, because he just said, we're not going to call it the rocket or the TK21X. He said, we're going to call it the BFR because it's a BFR. He's smart. He's smart.
Yeah. He's smart. But then he backed off from that. So I think whether he decided to tone it down and not use obscenity was a conscious choice. I want to ask about one other change of language, messaging from Elon, and I want to get your take on it. I've got my own hypothesis around this. So with SpaceX, one of the key missions was to colonize Mars, to make humans an interplanetary species. That was the mission statement. He started talking a little bit differently about that mission. Instead of saying we want to make humans an interplanetary species, he's now saying that we want to make sure the light of consciousness does not die out.
Oh, wow. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. He said it on a number of different times. And I'm like, that's a bigger statement. And I'm curious about what you think about that.
So does that mean that he's changed what he? Okay, so the answer is I don't know. But again, the man's a genius because he's got us and your listeners talking about it. So interplanetary species, does that mean that he realized he'd never be able to get people back from Mars? So, it's a one-way ticket to Mars, because that's my understanding. Second is, does that mean that he's gone for an even grander think, which is that consciousness isn't embodied just in our physical bodies, and he's trying to work out whether you can capture the essence of consciousness in, say, AI or some computer-based thing, and so that's going to be his next development? I don't know, but I'm sure he does. I'm sure it's not quite off the cuff. I'm sure he's got some deep thinking on it. Yeah. What's your take on it?
I think there is deep thinking around it. And I was pondering this because, there's been some resistance to his idea of making humans an interplanetary species. And some people are saying, why? Earth is our home planet. Let's live and die by its destiny. And we shouldn't go out into the universe because we've got this one planet. Let's look after it. And when the planet boils dry, as it will in 2 billion years, that's the end. And the human species may die out long before those 2 billion years happen. And I think he wanted to counter that. And because the idea of becoming an interplanetary civilization sounded, I think, in some cases, in some spheres, was talked about as an ego trip. And I think he wanted to get past that. It's not about being conquerors, which is, the interplanetary species sounds a little bit like colonization. And to make sure the light of consciousness doesn't die out is a bigger concept. It's an elevated concept. It's beyond humans and conquering. It's about this whole idea of consciousness. What is life is a important essence that we need to honor, whether it's on this planet or on other planets, and we need to look after that. Now, that sounds like an even more compelling vision than colonizing Mars or getting people off this planet, even though I found that original mission incredibly inspiring. I think this one takes it one step further and can pull more people into it. Interestingly, though, there is still some, people who poo-poo light of consciousness sounds a bit woo-woo.
Yeah, it sounds almost messianic. It sounds religious, like a leader of a religion. There's a book I read a few years ago about how when you are in power, it's almost inevitable that hubris takes over, this idea that you see no boundaries, you lose sense of reality. And I'm a big fan of the work of Kanye West, not just because he shares a surname with me, but, some of his work, the way he's pulled in peers to work with him, I really love his sounds. Now, as he's progressed through the industry, his thinking has become more wayward. And the people that say he's suffering from a mental illness, but musicians, politicians, entrepreneurs who experience extreme success often lose the plot. So it could just be that Elon's lost the plot. We'll look back and go, wow, he was really just gone there. We'll see.
I think it's a really important question to ask because it's a check on power, right? And my friend was asking me that very same question. We were talking about Elon and the light of consciousness mission, all that kind of stuff. And she said, do you think he wants to set himself up as the emperor?
Yeah.
Whatever, not even emperor, but the ruler of the universe. I'm like, no, I don't think so. And I'm eyeing and watching Elon for signs of hubris. And sometimes he does a few things that are like, And at the same time, I'm still more inclined to think that he's not succumbing to that. Though goodness knows he's primed to fall into those power hubris traps. So I like to, this is my personal preference because I'm an Elon fan. And so I should actually qualify that. It's not just completely dispassionate observation. I believe in his mission and I am aligned to this idea of saving consciousness and making sure that it does have a future beyond planet Earth. He hasn't been to space. He's choosing not to go to space yet. He wants to take a trip to Mars and, not die on the landing. And it's not important for him to be the first and doing that stuff. And one of the SpaceX Dragon crew missions, which is really fascinating, called the Inspiration 4, where they put 4 civilians up into space in Dragon and orbited the Earth for 3 days. Have you heard about this project?
Yeah.
Amazing. And talk about language, right? So this is like normal people, civilians. They put them through astronaut training and put them in Dragon and orbited the Earth. And there was 4 themes that each of those persons represented. There was leadership, prosperity, generosity, and achievement. Ooh, I can't remember the 4th one. That's really interesting from a language point of view. What was your insight around that, Chris?
I'm just blown away. So do you mind if I talk about something you said right at the beginning? You're an Elon fan.
Yeah.
I think that I have to differentiate what I think about him as a person and his achievements as a leader. And I think we often shouldn't do that because it becomes an excuse for bad behavior by leaders. But in the case of Elon, I remember watching the SpaceX launch. He had said something really horrendous about a Thai cave diver before that. And I thought, what a jerk Elon Musk is. What an absolute jerk. And then I watched the SpaceX launch and I watched the tower pull back from the rocket. And I watched the kind of mechanics of that tower pulling back, an incredibly intricate thing. And I thought, Elon designed that, or Elon directed that. Elon in some way made that happen, even if he didn't supervise each individual detail. But that's a hugely complex thing with him as the head of the organization. And he was closely involved. And he made that happen. His vision, his leadership, his oversight, his money often, that is really amazing. And I think that when you're building companies, you need to simplify as much as possible. You need to give people mental shortcuts. And I think language is fantastic for that. Because what kind of person are we looking for the Dragon crew? Are we looking for, we analyzed it. We're looking for a C112 type person, 35 to 45, physical fitness, run. No, so right, we want someone that defines leadership. We want someone that defines this. So again, language is working everywhere all the time. And when we're all conscious about language and we shape the language, then we can make our businesses work better because we help people understand what's in our head. That thing comes out of our head in language and lands in the other person's head and is unpacked just as we sent it off. And I think that's why language is great.
I agree. I think it's so compelling and it captures the imagination. So yeah, it's not like, these were the prime candidates because they fit all these physical assessment criteria, as you said, Chris. It was more about leadership, prosperity, etc. One of the questions that, let's bring this back to brass tacks for CEOs and listeners. Yeah, back to earth. So we want to talk about how to get the whole organization speaking with one voice, because I think that's a cascade of influence. We want a uniform or consistent, maybe not uniform, but a consistent message that inspires our stakeholders, that inspires our customers. How do we go about doing that?
Yeah, so I think if you walk around a business and you asked everyone 2 questions, it'd be interesting to see how much their answers align. And the 2 questions that I think the 2 questions you need to ask are, who are we and what do we stand for? Now, if everyone in the business kind of agrees, then you're in a great place. And if everyone in the business kind of doesn't agree, then that's where you should start, defining who are we and what do we stand for. Now, you can do that with Simon Sinek's purpose model. You can do it with, 3 or 4 different models. And of course, we have a model as well. But I think in terms of getting people's thinking aligned and people's language aligned, in the book, Strong Language, we talk about a framework that we've used over the last 10 years with service businesses, with startups, with Alphabet over in Silicon Valley, one of their kind of spin-offs, all the different businesses we've used this framework with. It's strikingly simple, which worries me because I think, it should be complex for it to be any good. but it's simple, but it seems to work. And the framework is really, imagine 3 levels: 10,000 foot, 1,000 foot, and ground level. And I think you're in Canberra at the moment. Is that right, Zoe?
That's correct. Yep.
So if I flew over Canberra at 10,000 feet and looked down, I would get a sense of the narrative of the city, if you like. I would say, well, look, it's not a big Midwest American city because it doesn't have, huge boulevards of 6-lane traffic on either side. Similarly, I'm pretty sure it's not a medieval mud village in old England. Because
No.
first of all, you don't get aerial photographs from that time, right? Yeah, that's good. But also, we can see what Canberra is. We can see there's some modern areas. It's a modern, probably not European city. It's got good infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So I get the sense of the narrative. And then I come down to 1,000 feet. And if I'm over your area where you're working now, I get a sense of the character. I get the personality coming out. And that personality is at 1,000 feet is definitely consistent with what's going on at 10,000 feet. And actually, if I came down to street view and went past your office building, I would go, well, look, I can see this isn't a 180-story Manhattan skyscraper, because first of all, it's not big enough. But I'm imagining you don't have a kind of 4-story glass-fronted lobby. You don't have a series of security. The nuts and bolts at ground level are consistent with the personality at 1,000 foot, which is consistent with the narrative at 10,000 foot. Now, that metaphor is really useful for helping people understand how they can create language in the business, for inside the business and for outside the business. Because you need to define, first of all, at 10,000 feet, who are we? What's the world we want to create? And if that's the world we want to create, what is it we're going to stand for? And let's be really clear. In my book, chapter 7, people keep on coming back to this. There's a chapter called The Nun's Maneuver. What is it we stand against? So the Nun's Maneuver, I was in West London, early days of my marriage with my wonderful wife. And round the corner from us, there was a convent. And the convent had put in a planning application to extend the convent. And I was walking along the road one day and I heard one of the nuns talking to one of our neighbours. And the nun said to our neighbour, if you don't support our planning application, you're working for the devil. And I thought, whoa, but at least they're really clear what they stand for and what they stand against. So for a business, being really clear what you stand against sometimes seems a little bit provocative, but it should be in a way. You want to call out what you are as a business, what you're standing against, just as much as you're clear on what you're standing for. So that gives the business an overarching narrative. That's the 10,000 foot. And in language, that helps you decide what you're going to talk about and the angle you're going to take on it and what you're going to stand against in your language. Now, when you come down to 1,000 foot, you can be all for climate change, all against climate change, excuse me. You can be all against climate change. Now, at the personality level, 1,000 foot, are you going to be confrontational? Are you going to be hard-hitting? There's a brand over here which is calling out the dairy industry. Even though they're not really in the dairy industry, they're calling out the dairy industry for their impact on the climate. Or you can be quite softly. There's a fruit drink brand over here in the UK called Days, I think, where they're much more soft. They're getting the message across softly. So you can have the same overarching narrative, but your choice of language, your choice of personality, at 1,000 foot is really important. And sometimes you can see gender differences in that. The traditional guy wants to be much more confrontational. There are women who have come up through CEO roles who are much more conciliatory. I'm not saying that is how women and men should behave, but it's something that has been observed over time. But also pay attention to your ground level details. So if you're communicating to your team and you're an engineering business, the chances are you use long engineered sentences full of jargon. If you're kind of like, we're a bunch of humans, we're going out every day to make our customers' lives better because we're serving them cups of tea at 6 a.m. when they're on the way, the language you use on the ground level, the grammar, whether you use jargon or not, be attentive to that as well. So when all 3 levels, 10,000 foot, 1,000 foot and ground level, when you're conscious of those and they're all aligned, then I think what happens is people get who you are as a business. They get what you stand for as a business. They can see themselves in the picture and they can start using that language as well. And language then is this thing that's shared within a business. And it's going back to what we said right at the beginning. It's sharing ideas, and language is building relationships.
That is so cool. I love it. That's a great model, great metaphor, and it totally makes sense now. So I'm gonna have that in the picture of my head now, like Canberra, 10,000 feet, and then getting closer to neighborhood, and then down to the nitty gritty, brass tacks, and the personality of the place. One last question for you. And before we started recording, we talked about, or you mentioned, Chris, that the language has changed and we need to be mindful of that. How has language changed and what do we need to be mindful of?
Yeah, thank you for talking about this because, I care about business. As a leader of my own business, I kind of care and think about what it means to lead a business. And I care about our teams because I'm not sure about you, but I've worked at some really horrible places. And I've worked at some really wonderful places, which 25 years later, I'm still loyal to. So how we think about ourselves as a business is really important, and how we think about our business in society is really important. And I think that there have been so many shocks to society over the last 3-4 years that if we don't think differently about our businesses in society now, or if we don't think about the language that our businesses are using in society now, I think we might have missed something. So the big shocks, big societal earthquakes that I think we've seen over the last 3 years, obviously, we've seen the effect of COVID. Obviously, we've seen the impact of climate change. We've seen Black Lives Matter as an important societal movement. And we've seen financial shocks related to all of those things. So when society has changed so much, it would be kind of willfully bad if we as business leaders didn't change how our business is and didn't change how our business communicates and didn't change our business's language. So when language is working everywhere all the time, our customers, our employees, now look to us all the time for our language to say, what is our voice? What is our opinion on these societal changes? So I think going back to that 10,000 foot level, what we're seeing a lot of brands do is move social purpose or ESG or these other things, move them out of the annual report and move them into the mainstream of their communications internally and externally. So we saw Ben & Jerry's come out with a bold press ad saying, we must dismantle white supremacy. Silence is not an option. We've seen Oatly, which is an oat milk alternative to dairy, coming out and saying in their external communications and their internal communications, I think, the milk lobby thinks you're stupid. So very, very conscious communicating on those things. So that's at the 10,000 foot level, if you like. At the 1,000 foot level, we've seen some brands stop being so shouty. We talked a little bit about woo-woo earlier, and maybe even that term we're going to stop using soon, because in some ways it implies that any of the self-consciousness or self-awareness is somehow laughable. I'm not criticizing you, Zoe, because I use it all the time. But within that space, there's a great app and a great team running the business Headspace. And their language at the 1,000 foot level isn't confrontational. Their level at the 1,000 foot level, that personality, is gentle, it's understanding, just as it is with Dash. That's the name of the fruit water. And then when you come down to the ground level details, I think it's good for business owners to start thinking, let's just do a check on the actual words we're using. So there's a great web resource called the Conscious Style Guide, and you can just run some of your language through there, and it will remind you that nude, if you're selling tights or if you're selling skin plasters, nude isn't just one color, and it will remind you of some of the other assumptions in your language. So even down at the ground level, I think we as business owners need to think about what our language is, what it's doing. Is it still up to date? Is it giving the right message to our teams and to the society that we exist in?
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for explaining that. That was really, really helpful. So, how changes in society allow us to review what's happening at the 10,000 foot level in our businesses and re-ask the questions. What do we stand for? What do we stand against? And who are we? And I think we need to constantly be doing that. And sensitive leaders, ones who care about their community, their customers, and the world, will be constantly looking at that and asking those questions in service to how can we be of service to everyone, to our customers and to the world. And that lights me up. That helps me feel confident that leaders can make deliberate, conscious decisions, as you said, about the language they use for particular purposes and not just wing it or not just use like schleppy words because they're the sales words of the month, that they're our trigger language. Like, it's not manipulation of language. It's deliberate choices that echoes our values and our purpose in the world. And I think that is a wonderful message for leaders to embrace and to explore with this work. Any last words, Chris? I can't believe I just said that. I would not intend to say that, but it out it came. Any last words from you before we sign off?
Oh, I mean, we could talk for hours about language, but I mean, I think language is what makes us who we are as a species. Language isn't difficult. I think just stopping and being conscious is the main thing. And yeah, I'd say read the book, of course, read strong language, but I don't mean that really. I just think, look around and see who are the great leaders and see how they've used language, and have a think about how you can use language. It's, as the subtitle of the book is, the fastest, smartest, cheapest marketing tool you're not using, business tool you're not using. Yeah, just say, if I want to change something tomorrow and I want it changed by the end of the day, chances are language will do it. But, spending money, building new structures or anything else will be far more difficult. Probably you can change a lot straight away with language.
That's beautiful. Chris, where can people find more about you and your work?
Thank you very much. So the business is called Verbal Identity. So it's at verbalidentity.com. I talk a lot on LinkedIn. So I have one of those names. There's a few Chris Wests in the world, but if anyone searches Chris West Verbal Identity on LinkedIn, then I share some thoughts there about what's going on in business, what's going on in business language.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to get myself. I'm going to get myself a copy of your book and definitely make sure that I'm following you on LinkedIn. Chris, this has been a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I think as a language lover and as somebody who wants to make a difference in the world, your work is so powerful and so important. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, that was so much fun. I totally enjoyed that interview. One of the key takeaways for me was the whole model. So what is the view of your business from 10,000 feet? What is your view of your business from 1,000 feet? And what is the personality of your business? And asking the questions, who are we, what we stand for, and what we stand against, was so galvanizing for me. I feel really inspired to go and wrestle with those questions and to really think about our communication and the use of language and how we are showing up and influencing the world. I hope you take away a similar inspiration to tackle the language of your leadership. It's powerful. It's your ticket to key influence. It's your ticket to feeling fantastic about your messaging. And I think it elevates our purpose when we choose the language consciously. I totally enjoyed that. I hope you did too. I would love your feedback. Email me, zoe@zoerouth.com. I love hearing from leaders. I love hearing your impressions of the show and what you're taking away and applying in your own work. Also, this is my call out. I'm always looking for big thinkers with big hearts who want to make a big difference. And the place for you, if that's you, is in my Amplifiers program. It's a leadership program for CEOs, managing directors, and general managers from across diverse sectors who are looking for the cutting edge, who are looking to elevate their leadership, like lessons from Chris about how to use language, and are looking to share challenges with other like-minded leaders. It's a growing community. We have people from all sorts of different sectors and parts of Australia, and hopefully soon from parts around the world. If that's you, let's chat. Have a look on my website, zoerouth.com. Click on programs, click on amplifiers, take a cruise around. If you want to know more, let's have a conversation. Just reach out at my email, zoe@zoerouth.com, and away we go. In the meantime, you know what? Live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.